There could have been voices before this invasion, instead of agitating for something that we knew our adversary absolutely hated and said was a red line as recently as last September. Before you signed the agreement, once again agitating for NATO, Russia said that it was a red line. Now, there is no justification for the invasion. I'm not saying that, but there are reasons for the invasion.
But you are justifying it, Rand. Yeah, that was Rand Paul parroting Vladimir Putin, the dictator of Russia's propaganda today. He later took that lunacy even further with talking points straight from Putin's handbook, telling Secretary of State Tony Blinken, who recently returned from Kyiv, that Ukraine isn't exactly its own country.
You could also argue the countries they've attacked were part of Russia.
Well,
we're part of the Soviet Union.
Yes, and I firmly disagree with that proposition. It is the fundamental right of these countries to decide their own future and their own destiny. And
I'm not saying it's not, but I'm saying that the countries that have been attacked, Georgia and Ukraine, were part of the Soviet Union.
And that does not give
they were
Russia
part
the
of
right
the
to attack
Soviet
them.
Union since the 1920s.
But that does not give Russia the right to attack them.
Woo, none of that is surprising from the mostly isolationist son of isolationist perpetual presidential candidate Ron Paul. In fact, it is part of Rand's origin story as the OG Tea Party candidate. And make no mistake, Rand Paul is just as wacky as the current crop of extreme GQ peers. Back in 2010, he cited his outsider bona fides as a doctor, an ophthalmologist, just not certified by the national body, but rather by an organization that he himself operated, which may explain his quackery, crusading to have actual Dr. Anthony Fauci fired in the middle of a pandemic. Also back in 2010, you may remember that Rand demurred when the Louisville Courier Journal asked if he would have voted for the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And then he tried to explain his views in an interview with Rachel Maddow.
How about desegregating lunch counters? Lunch counters?
Well, what it gets into is that then if you decide that restaurants are publicly owned and not privately owned, does the owner of the restaurant own his restaurant, or does the government own his restaurant? These are important philosophical debates, but not a very practical discussion.
Yeah, not very practical. Joining me now, Charles Booker, Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate in Kentucky and author of the brand new book, From the Hood to the Holler, a story of separate worlds, shared dreams, and the fight for America's future. An apt title today, Charles Booker. Thank you for being here. Let's talk about Rand Paul.
Correct.
Let's start with the Ukraine comments that he made, because saying that Ukraine is not a real country and that it used to be part of the USSR, well, that's like saying the United States used to be part of Mexico, because a big old chunk of it used to. So I guess if Mexico decided to invade Texas and California and New Mexico, would he say, well, I mean, it used to be part of Mexico?
First of all, I joined the country in shaking my head at Rand Paul. He is a joke in every sense of the word. And what he showed today is just the latest example of him opposing democracy and choosing to side with Vladimir Putin over the lives of innocent people who are striving to find and realize democracy. I can't wrap my mind around it, but we need to get him out of the way. He is stoking these divides. He is fanning hate. He is making a mockery of Kentuckians while we struggle with generational poverty and are fighting to survive. And this is why I'm running the campaign to beat him and building the movement to build the infrastructure so that we don't have Rand Pauls again in office at the state, federal, or local level.
Can you think of, when you talk to constituents in Kentucky, what do Republicans who talk to you say that Rand Paul has delivered for the state?
You know, when I talk to people across Kentucky, Democrats, Republicans, independents, and I mention the name Rand Paul, what typically follows is laughter. People see him as a joke. They see him as an embarrassment, and he is. But the reality is most people don't know what he does. And so by us calling out the fact that he is profiting from our pain as the pandemic has really crushed so many of us in Kentucky, he's saying, burn your mask. Don't worry about vaccines while his family is getting stock in remdesivir. He's been selling us out. And the story that I'm lifting up, and even why I even wrote the book From the Hood to the Holler, is how do we build the coalitions to make sure that we get clowns like Rand Paul out of office and protect our fight for our future? And because of this work, I have over 20,000 volunteers, and a lot of them still got the MAGA hat because our issues are bigger than party.
Well, let me read a little bit from your book. This is an excerpt from the Hood to the Holler, your book. It says, and this is about running for Senate in 2020, when you ran against Mitch McConnell. You wrote, of course, the fact that McConnell has run Kentucky like an old school political boss wouldn't be as much of a problem if Mitch McConnell were still the man he made himself out to be at the start of his career. Our junior Senator Rand Paul is the worst kind of true believer. We learned today that Mitch McConnell, he's two people. He's the person who said he was exhilarated. I felt exhilarated by the fact that this fellow, Trump, finally totally discredited himself. He told Jonathan Martin. He asked about the 25th Amendment. He said Trump finally put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger. Couldn't have happened at a better time. He seems to be such a pure political animal with no soul inside of him. What was he when he first ran? Was you insinuate in your book that he wasn't always like that?
Well, you're right. Mitch McConnell has no soul at this point. But in the beginning of his career, before I was born, he supported organized labor. He supported expanding health care. He supported women's rights. In a lot of ways, he would condemn himself now. But it just shows the hypocrisy in the pursuit of power at all costs. And look, as a Kentuckian, we have Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul. I want to do my part and get rid of one of them and keep Mitch McConnell have the majority seat. And I'm asking everybody, go to charlesbooker.org and help us in this effort, because the people of Kentucky are not being represented by clowns like Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul.
You know, there are a lot of people who have said to me about your race when you ran against Mitch McConnell that had the National Democratic Party paid attention and not sort of leaned in favor of your then primary opponent because he was, you know, self-funded. There are other demographic and other reasons. And the dismissal of a state like Kentucky as being competitive. I asked my producers to pull this. Mitch McConnell, his last re-election against Amy McGrath was 57.8% of the vote that he got. That's, you know, it's over half. Rand Paul also got about 57%. But this state, your state, has a Democratic governor. And he won real narrowly, but he got half the vote. That means that it is possible to win for a Democrat to win. What would you say back to people who are not going to pay attention to the Kentucky race, to the Rand Paul reelect, because they say, well, that's Kentucky, that's a Republican state?
Well, look, we ignore places like Kentucky to our collective detriment. Kentucky's the type of place that gave rise to the Donald Trumps. We've seen plenty of them. And what I'm showing in this campaign and what I'm fighting for now is not just about beating a terrible politician, but it's about healing. It's about our pursuit of democracy. It's about making sure that everyone can live a gainful life. And what I'm asking folks to do is take a look again. Look at the infrastructure and the work that we're building, the movement that we're building, taking pages from the playbook that Georgia helped to show to the country and adding our own chapter. If we lift up a vision that inspires people to believe things can be different, if we listen to the people and quit playing the political games, we can build a coalition and change our future. And I'm proud of what we're doing here in Kentucky. And we're going to blow out Rand Paul. And I'm asking everyone to join me in making sure we get that done.
And I should note that Andy Beshear, the current Governor Beshear, is the second Governor Beshear. It's not like he's the first Democratic governor in like 100 years. His father was also governor. Is Kentucky politics name-based or is it issue-based?
It really is issue-based. If you look at the map, a lot of folks that voted for Donald Trump also voted for Bernie Sanders. This is not about party. It's about who's actually going to fight for us. Yeah.
Senate candidate Charles Booker, good luck of Kentucky. Thank you very much. Author of From the Hood to the Holler. And that is tonight's ReidOut.